Okay, let's jump in and do a little bit of preliminary thinking about color schemes and what your color palette is going to be. These resources are on the color theory page of the website. The color schemes explained, right? That's this one that we looked at together and reminds you of some of the options for color schemes that you can consider. You can use some variety within that, and you also have to consider what tints and shades and how muted your tones are going to be. One of the particular tools that I like is the Adobe Color palette because it lets you start with the photograph that you're going to work from. That, again, doesn't mean that you're tied to it, but it gives you a set of colors to start from as you explore your options. Let's show you how that works. So that's this one here, the Color Palette by Adobe. And I find that the website works a little better than the tools that they have in Photoshop, but that might just be because I've used this more than I've used the Photoshop one. So I'm going to drag and drop in the photo that I'm going to be using for this exercise. And as you drop that in, it will look at that photo and pick some colors from it and give you a set of options that might be a particular color palette. Now you'll notice over here on the side that they have some different moods. This one's colorful, this one's bright, right? Maybe it's a little bit lighter, muted. And you notice that the muted is also very similar in value. Okay, so as you explore this, these two colors are pretty much the same thing, just lighter and darker, right? These are fairly similar. This one has a little more yellow, but a lighter and a darker version, and sort of your mid-tone neutral. As you get into some of these others, we're getting darker, right? A little more deeper value. And one more, right? That eliminates sort of the lighter end of the green here. And this just keeps the one that you had previously. So let's go back to the colorful version. And while there may be some blue here in the background that we may or may not have noticed, you can also pick any one of these and move them to another area, so you can adjust that. Okay. I may decide that I don't want that blue at all, that I want to really rely on the more neutral gray tones, which gives me my perhaps complementary, right? This pink and this green, red and the green, are fairly similar there. Once you find something that you like, go ahead and take a screenshot or partial screenshot that gives you all of those references. You're going to want to work with those later when we're exploring color palettes with the actual paint. Similarly, you can continue to move these around until you really see the range you want to work with. And I like to have a little bit of contrast there. So maybe the browns are going to be a little bit darker and my grays are going to be a little bit, I don't know, lighter. Maybe a little cooler too. Who knows? Maybe I want this green. I want to pick up the green in this leaf set that's a little bit cooler. And maybe I do need to have my gray be a little bit darker to then offset that. Okay, and do I want that yellowy green or do I want... I think I do want that yellowy green. I love that yellowy green. Okay, so that's kind of fun to play with. That's not so bad. Then we could turn here to the color wheel, and then you can flip into, and again, that's up here, right? Takes the palette that I just had. In fact, let me take a quick screenshot of that because I like it. There we go. Now we can go through analogous, monochromatic, triad, etc. So if I'm looking at that thinking, okay, what's a triad version of those colors? Ooh. And again, I can start to pull out any one of these. As I start to pull them around, it moves all of them. So now I've sort of lost where it was when I came into the whole shindig. But you can see how these are going to give you these rules. Okay, and then I can go back to here. I can say, okay, let me, keeping this theme, go back to the color wheel and be a little more careful with what I'm doing. How about a compound? Ooh, a little bright. Square. Not bad. But again, these are all the same value. So if you did your painting like that, you'd have very little value contrast. So we would need to play a little bit with that and see what happens when we start to pull a couple of these out. There we go. We had a little more pop there. Not too bad. So this is sort of what we have in mind here, right? You can continue to work with these relationships. So if you know, right, we have that pink. Where's that pink? That is the flower. Nice. I could play with more greens. I could make it more neutral. I could make it more saturate. Ooh, no. But you could, right? You have some options in there. And then you could switch out maybe this one. We can go down here and maybe I just need to make that make that my darker neutral. Oh, and maybe a little less green. Whoa, don't move too far. Just a little less green. This one I really want a little more yellow. And sort of see where all of that goes, right? And you can make any of these with the bottom sliders. It doesn't change the colors. It just makes it sort of a little bit lighter or darker to play with here. Once you have some palettes to work with, then you can make your way to the actual paint. I would suggest keep going back and make sure that you have, these are not going to be your only colors. These are going to be your sort of dominant colors, and you're going to want to have some sort of relationship among them. You could, I wouldn't suggest having two things that are too close together, and realize that as you do, say, this flower, you may have 2 or 3 sort of tones of that sort of pink range. You may decide that the warmer ones come forward and the cooler ones recede. This one's a much darker version, right? So you have some options in there, but it'll give you a range to work with. And you know that if you're going to use these greens for your palette, that they're not the bluey greens, right? You may decide that you like the blue greens and the yellow greens together, but then your palette is more dominantly green than not. So don't forget those neutrals, right? Whether they're the brownish neutrals or the grayish neutrals or somewhere close in between. Those are useful too. Okay, so we've done this part. Take another quick screenshot. And now let's play with paint. Okay, so let's take a look here. This is the picture that we're working from, right? So don't mind the glare. We've got the pinks, we've got the yellowy greens, the bluier greens, the darker maroon color, browns, grays, that blue we were looking at in the photo, it's harder to see in the print, and our lovely yellows back in here. Okay, so I took this, I put it into the program, I looked at some color palettes. Then I just went back to my picture, okay, and started to try and match, again, with a little bit of color testing to figure out the pale, how much water, how to get a more vibrant tone, okay, and working from there, I started to give myself some palettes. I was thinking originally that you could do this on the blank space next to your color wheel. Some of you have small color wheels. That might leave you enough space. I actually want to play with larger areas of color, so I may do this, like you may want to do this on a half sheet. If you need more paper, we'll give you some. Or you can do it on the back of the test sheet you were doing the other day. So that's an option. I would give yourself several different palettes and perhaps keep the ones that are going to be like the colors I need for this branch in here, right? Do I want the lighter, warmer version? Do I want the darker, slightly cooler version? How do I need 2 or 3 more browns to sort of play with? And then I can mix and match. Same thing here when we're looking at the background. Do I need it a little bluer and a little darker to go sort of in, oh, again, glare, difficult. Hmm. Tough to tell with the print. All right. Oh, maybe that's a little better. So maybe I even need it darker than this to go with this gray. It's the darkness in the background that's going to set off the lightness of the leaves. So I want to make sure I have that kind of value contrast. That's huge, right? This looks almost black in the background. So it's much darker than this. So you have to think about, well, how am I going to get it that much darker? How much contrast do I want between this and this green, which actually when I look at it on the paper here looks really light, but then I bring it in and next to this, it's almost exactly the same as the highlight in this leaf color, right? So play around with it. You're not going to have a print to play with unless you have a printer at home. And even then the colors when you print them out are kind of iffy. So we'll be able to do some of that when we're back on campus. But this will give you some ideas for working from the screen, right? And those color swatches that you had pulled up, where you might want to go with your color palettes. But give yourself some options. Is it this yellowy green, or is it a slightly cooler yellowy green that you want to work with, right? So you have this kind of range, right? The goal today is to get at least 4 different color palettes, and then maybe you are going to end up going in and being like, yes, I like this one, but I also like this one, and I kind of like the darker one that even has to be darker, so there's 3. This is okay, but I'm going to need a darker version of this as well, and I still don't have a brown I like, so I have to go figure that out. And then you can kind of do that mix and match thing for your ultimate palette. Don't forget that you have your reference here as to some of your options for what colors you can mix, and that the vibrancy of the color will vary too. You can mute your color, right, a little bit by adding the complement. So if your green is too green and you need it to be a little more muted, to be a little bluer, you may actually need to add a little bit of orange or a little bit of yellow to that, to knock it down a little bit, right? You may need to add a little red to something to make it a little more neutral, tone it down, but just a little tiny bit. So my other suggestion for that, let's make a mess, shall we? My other suggestion, first of all, when you're doing these colors, I would highly recommend giving yourself some squares to work in. And you may not, maybe actually lined up squares would be good. And if you want to make sure that you're not going to end up having the water blending everything together, give a little space, right? A little bit of an awareness there. And maybe I can do a little better this time at making things more even across the board. 3, 4, okay, now I have 6. Oh, I need 6, but there we go. You give yourself at least 5, and if you're going to do some like tints and shades, then maybe 6. Okay, so the other thing I was going to suggest is that mixing on your palette lid, first of all, I didn't clean mine from last time, it's kind of small, and we need a whole ton of colors, right? So another option is to use a piece of parchment paper, oven paper, wax paper, any or all of the above. Now, it's a little bit tough to mix on because it beads up, but it is a bigger surface area, right? You can see this is the one I was playing with a few minutes ago. Be aware as you're working that the colors that you're mixing, the colors that you're mixing, as you're mixing a row, you may want to use some of these colors to mix the other colors so that they stay more similar, right? Just bear that in mind. Again, I'm going to highly recommend, you don't really want that much water for these, because unless you're doing super pastels, right? Because we only have a little area and it doesn't take much water to make it a little crazy. Now, my I have a pinky purple here, right? This is my pinky purple next to the white. And it's pretty vibrant. So again, if you're doing some testing, don't overlook that testing thing, right? That's that color pretty much all by itself. Now, how much color I need, right? And that gives my intensity, a little increased intensity. If I wanted to actually make that darker, there's a point at which you have all kinds of pigment, but that's the pigment it is. And if I want to make that darker, I have to consider what's my opposite on here, right? If I'm somewhere in this range, because that's this one, right? Then what's opposite that over here, like that yellowy green? So maybe I want to add a little bit of that yellowy green, and whether you add literally yellow or you go to this kind of hyperactive green color. I add a little water in there so I don't have to have it on my brush. And again, for heaven's sakes, pay attention to your, particularly with the lighter colors. I'm going to put a little yellow over here so I can mix in. I can put that color right there. I'm going to clean that brush off, but I'm going to go get the green. So I have that to play with. All right, a little bit of that. And we're not mixing very much of these. We're just giving ourselves some idea of how we got there, right? And you may want to make some of the notes around here. I just kind of mix things. A little bit of green. There we go. So if we add that yellowy green in, you can see how that changes. There we go. Changes that magenta color and knocks it down just a little bit. It's a little subtle. There we go. So it's a little bit muted. It's going to come off as a little bit brown, right? Because those are the complements. And then if you want to go back in and mix in a little bit bluier purple and see what happens there too. I happen to have one on the palette. A little bit bluier purple. What happens when we take a look at that? And remember, when you're mixing colors, there's mixing here and then putting it down. There's mixing by putting down a layer and then maybe going back over that layer with something a little bit different, a little bit of a glaze. And again, I'm under the lights here. This is drying really fast between the heat of the light and the fact that there's no humidity today. All right, so you can change those colors by putting glazes over. If it's still wet, really wet, it'll mix. And we could even go in with that straight yellow and glaze right over there and make that much browner. It's kind of interesting to see. So these are the kinds of things to think about as you then go in to create the colors you want to use. So if I want to have two of my, say, 5 or 6 colors that are referencing the flower and the darkness of the flower, I can do that. But I am going to make it dark, so it's going to take a lot of that. And I think I want it bluer as well. Pick up a little bit of that bluey purple. That'll knock it down. Yep. And I want to mellow that out a little bit. Maybe a little bricky color. Let's see what happens if I do. Yeah. So here's the thing. That orange is going to have a little bit of yellow in it, which is right the complement of the purple, which will mute that some and give me maybe, yeah, a slightly more muted, slightly darker. Mulberry tone to work with. Okay, so again, if we bring the tone down a little bit, see that this is the pink and this is the darker purple for the flowers. Now, this can also play up a little bit on these parts here that are like the little buds on the branch. That can also have some of that darker purpley color on it. And I can use that sort of gradation to do the shadows. Okay, now I am a fan of that silver. I need one of these silvery greens. I love the silvery green and this yellowy green. So let's play with the greens a little bit. Now, okay, I just mixed purples and I'm gonna try and make a green. I better get some clear water because otherwise my greens are gonna be a mess. Particularly a yellowy green. Goodness. All right, I'm gonna move that palette and work with a new one. Whee. Okay, so we could start with this crazy yellow green, right? It's pretty crazy. But it doesn't take much to knock that down into something pretty warm. There we go. And if you find that that's still kind of neon-y, it's a little neon-y. It's a little yellowier. All right. And interestingly enough, right, we have this orange, yellowy orange. So it's still in that yellow warm, but the red in the orange is going to tone down the green, right? So those are the kinds of things you have to be thinking about as you're mixing. What's your thought process, right? Oh yeah, that's going to mellow that right out. Lovely. It ends up with sort of more of a marigold feel, but let's get some of the, so we don't lose the green entirely. Mm-hmm. So there's some subtlety to this, and sometimes you're going to notice the color differences, and sometimes you aren't, and sometimes if you glaze over, you'll get it a little bit darker. Whatever it is that you need. So find one of those colors that's working for you, and let's put that yellow-green right in here. Right next to the mulberry, just to make things vibrate a little bit. Now I also need a silvery bluey green, right? But we don't want it too far, because so far I'm really warm, right? Warm tones. So even like if I did this straight green, that's way off, right? That does not look like it goes with any of that. But I'm still going to use that as some of the base, right? Or some of the little bit of the green that I'm playing with. And let's add in a little bit of this warmer green here. And a little bit of that yellow that I had from the other one, so they're not too far off. What does that look like? Right? That's a little calmer. It's a little calmer. Still not calm enough. So maybe we add a little bit of the orange in there. And it's mellowed out sort of substantially. So let's put that in there. Here, gives us a little bit more of a green. And if you decided, we'll come back and maybe do a glaze over half of that. That's a little bluer. It's still pretty vibrant, right? But that'll make it a little bit darker, and we can play with maybe this turquoisey thing that we got going on. We can do a glaze with that. That won't be too horrible. Let's do it on part of that and see what we think. Interesting, right? What happens if we do... There is something in there that will work, right? We're in the ballpark. We still need a neutral gray. Don't reach for that black, right? Just don't do it. Resist the temptation. This is the palette that we're working with, and we have the purples from the other one, right? So what happens if we now, knowing that we have this green, and we started with that, this original magenta, right? Original magenta, and I want one of these to be pretty dark. And we have this green to go with that magenta. And the yellow in there. How are we doing in the neutral color? Oop, that's a nice green though. Ooh, that's a nice green. Apparently my green needed a little more purple. Oh, smashing. Oh, that's much better. And plus that gives me some of the value contrast that I needed. And that, again, keeps it all in the fairly warm palette range. Now, I still need to gray this thing out. It's still really green, obviously. Let's see what we can do about that. Still a fairly bluey green. So let's add a little more orange. Let's see where we're headed here. Bluey, bluey. Let's have some of this stuff kicking around. Handy dandy. And if you felt like you wanted to go for the regular, more traditional orange color, we have some of that as well. Okay, so again, sometimes this just helps so that you can be mixing without worrying about getting your colors on your palette contaminated, on your tray contaminated. Not so bad. Okay, so this is this is actually a really nice neutral brown. Ooh, that could be good for the, not what I was aiming for, but could be good for the branch color. Oh yes. Oh, I finally have a brown I like. What? Nice. So again, this kind of like discovery of the colors and what it actually takes to bring it all together, and the fact that this purple is actually in this brown and so is this green, right? That's going to help tie that all together. I'm kind of liking this palette. Now, this is palette number 3 for me. So, like, work through some color options. And I still need that to be more neutral, which means it needs more blue. So, let's go grab some. Pick a blue. Pick a blue. There we go. Oh, yes, nice. That's going to make a nice gray. How do we do? Gray. Fabulous. And there's my gray color. Notice, not once did I use the black or the brown or the white. All right. So see what you can do. You've got all these other colors to play with. Stay away from those. If you put brown in something, it's going to look pretty flat. You can add it, but you have the capacity to mix your own, right? And right now I'm pretty happy with that palette, so it's not too bad. And you can see how parts of these are very similar to what I had before. These are a little different. This is darker. This should really be darker. I may have to mix something a little bit darker, but I like this brown a lot. And then have an awareness of where those are going in your painting. That could work for you. You don't need the tape. I just happen to have the tape on the thing from the last project. So aim for 4 different palettes. And if you really want to mix it up, like we could then say, okay, I know I like this palette. What happens if I take this in the extreme pretty much just from the, what if I like totally brighten it up, right? And we don't mute any of the colors with their complement. I don't even know if I can, if we just did it from here and we're thinking about that. Clean water. I suppose that's our yellow. I don't even know how you get there. All right, let's pretend this is over here with, there we go. That's green. Talk about compliments. Whole schmoly. And maybe this one we get with predominantly the yellow. Only enough green to like blend from the bleed that went over. And then, okay, let's do this. What have we got? This is a brown. This is a flat brown right out of the tray. Right? Is it a lot different from the one that I mixed? No, you can see that. I don't know. You tell me. There we go. Over here. The differences are subtle, right? The differences are subtle. It is possible, again, I'm not a fan of the black, but I could make this my gray, right? It would definitely be darker. And then be really careful, again, about which red. Like I could, this is the, you can use this red. That's not even the warm red, but, right, those sort of clash a little bit. So make sure if whatever one you pick as the red version, and I picked a purpley one to begin with, stick sort of in that ballpark so it doesn't clash too much. And again, remember, if you get something too dark, what is your easiest thing to do? Erase, right? Go in and blot with the tissue and get that a little bit lighter. So these are going to look, the variety of colors is going to look greater in daylight and in person than it is on camera. But these kinds of subtle differences are what I mean by changing your palette. It doesn't necessarily mean, I could also do the like a cooler version of this. I could decide that my, instead of using that magenta color, I could go with a purple for my lilac, which might then mean that's my lighter tone for my flower, right? Much cooler. And that might mean that my cooler light green is, my cooler light green would be more like that, as opposed to that yellowy version. And my darker green might be even bluer than that. And my gray is going to be even bluer than that. Ugh, put black in anything and it just like knocks everything out of the way. No fun. All right, there's some blue in there, that's better. And then my brown, cooler brown. And a cooler brown. So you could have a cooler version of that. You could also have a warmer version of that that's like closer to the orangey version. Right, see how that's different from the pinky red? And if we do this, and then lift out. We can have a sort of a peachier pink. And let's go for almost a straight yellow, right? We could have, and then our green here would be really mellowed out. Grab some of that red to go with that green. Seriously mellowed out. Oh, maybe not that mellow. It's going to end up being my gray. All right, and then back to a similar gray tone. And, ooh, this is the warm one, right? So this would be a really warm reddish brown. So we would need, if we take some of that to go with this. Put some more red in there. More of a brick color, right? And we could make that even darker with darker. Okay, so we have like a cooler version of the same idea and a orangier version of the same idea, but the tones I'm looking at that I really like are this one. So those are the kinds of varieties that you can give yourself with your color schemes, right? And again, I would look at this and I would say that we have pretty much like a split complementary, right? A fairly complementary palette. We've got reds and greens. And then more like purples and yellow greens. They're not analogous because they're definitely further across each other. But then you can look back at the color wheel and look at the tetradic versus all of those options. All of those options. Okay, so have a plan, come up with color schemes, then this is going on, the picture of this with perhaps any testing that you did goes on your color theory slide, right, for today. And then you're going to take a full sheet, because this won't take you that long, and start to sketch out your drawing. When you sketch, you need, don't use just an HB pencil, use a lighter pencil, like a 4H or something. And don't erase. Don't mar up the surface. I know this is just on a quarter panel. You're going to do this on a full sheet, right? But this, right, is, oh, can I do this? Right? So I just need to know roughly where those flowers are going. I don't need to outline every single one of them. I just need to know roughly where these flowers are going over here, right? The little buds. I need to know roughly where that stem is going to come up through, right? I don't need to go in and draw all these flowers. These I'm just going to bleed these in anyway, right? However, if I have little areas that I want to see through to those colors, I'm going to want to know where those might go in here, right? So that's what those little outlines are for, is to remind me to not put pink there so that I can see the colors behind it, right? And that's really, don't shade anything. Don't go in and erase anything. If you don't like the lines you did, do another line next to it and get a better one. But the lighter you do that, the better off you'll be. And then we'll just paint right over it. It'll be fine. Good luck. The goal is to bring your palettes, your color schemes, and your sketch to class on the next on-campus day. We can do this, you guys. It's going to be awesome. It's very exciting. Good luck.